Bon, alors nous sommes...
Okay, colleagues, we have a quorum and everything's in order. We can continue. Yes, Mr. Deltel. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's a bit of a surprise to see Mr. Holland here. No offense, but he's the parliamentary secretary to the minister responsible for democratic institutions, and the idea was that parliamentary committees would only involve members who are not parliamentary secretaries. So it's just a question. That's right. Mr. Holland will not be voting, and he will not even be getting involved in our deliberations. I don't know whether the committee objects to his being here today. Is there consent for his attendance? For him to be sitting here at the table during our meetings? Mr. Chairman, I would say it's not a matter of a specific individual. It's just a matter of parliamentary secretaries in general. I think Mr. Deltel's point is that a commitment was made to that effect, and I think that any rule should be followed in general without respect to specific individuals. Okay, any other opinions? Mr. de Courcy? Mr. Cullen, were you first? I'm sorry, Mr. de Courcy. Mr. Cullen? I just wanted to say that the same thing happened on the Environment Committee with Mr. Aldag, and the parliamentary secretary attends without speaking or voting.
For potential concern, and that Mr. Kenney has iterated nothing personal, but I have seen this work fine on environment, where the participation of the parliamentary secretary is simply there as observer, which is the right of, I believe, any MP to come to the committee. So just to confirm and clarify, as I'm sure Mr. Holland or Mr. de Courcy will confirm, that no voting and all of that good stuff. But he gets to watch our deliberations, which I think is fine to be able to do.
Thank you, Mr. de Courcy.
Well, I pretty much was going to say the same thing as Mr. Cullen. Same there? Okay. So is there consent? Yeah, okay, fine, thank you. So welcome, Mr. Holland. Now, let's move along. Let's get these routine motions passed. I'll begin with the first. The first motion, yes, Ms. Sahota?
More analysts from the Library of Parliament that the committee retain as needed, and at the discretion of the chair, the services of 2 or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist in its work.
We don't need a seconder. No, we can go to debate. Does anyone want to speak? No? Yes, Mr.
I'm not speaking against or for. I'm just trying to confirm this is different from the routine draft that was passed out. Is that correct?
Yes, it is correct. I noticed from the House orders that 2 have been assigned to this committee. So at that point, because of that fact, I figured it would be more accurate to state it in that way, where at the very least we would have 2, and if needed, from time to time, perhaps more.
So would you be able to repeat the wording? I
Yeah.
have a sense that the clerk may not have, unless you've already given a text to the clerk.
No, I can repeat it, absolutely. That the committee retain, as needed, and at the discretion of the chair, the services of 2 or more analysts from the Library of Parliament to assist in its work.
So, thank you. So, is there agreement with this motion? Any objections? I don't see any, so I deem the motion adopted. And I would invite our 2 analysts to join us. Welcome and congratulations. Deuxième motion.
Motion number 2 on the creation possibly, of a subcommittee on agenda and procedure. Is there someone to move the motion? Mr. Cullen? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I look at this is a pro forma version of how the subcommittee, and I've seen subcommittees work well, and I think for a committee as potentially complicated as this, unique as this one, subcommittee would serve us well. I would like the committee members to consider the inclusion of a member from the Bloc and Madame May as well in the subcommittee, just to allow for input. Subcommittee typically takes care of things like scheduling, certain witness list vetting, and I think it would be unfortunate if the subcommittee made a decision on either of those types of topics and then had to return to the main committee, try to pass a motion that in fact did not work for our colleagues. So I would seek I can move the very specific motion, Mr. Chair, but do
you have it you have it written down?
I do have the actual terminology, but not in enough copies for the witnesses. It only the one explicit change is to add 2 members, and 1 each of the Bloc Québécois and Madame May.
Okay, so that the subcommittee on agenda and procedure be established and composed of the chair, 2 vice chairs, and 2 members of the government party to be designated by the whip, and a member from the Bloc and Green Party, and that the chair of the committee be the chair of the subcommittee. Is
that is the addition that I would look to make.
Any comments or questions?
I'd like to thank Nathan very much for that proposal, because I was going to ask if I could please play a role on the subcommittee on agenda and procedure. Et aussi pour mon collègue de Bloc Québécois. Merci.
Okay, so apparently there's consent, so I declare the motion passed. Mr. De Courcy? I'm certainly open to the addition of the Bloc and Green members. We Liberals are okay with having just 1 member on the subcommittee. So that would be 5 members, 1 from each party and the chair. Okay, I get it. Okay, right, because it says 2 members of the government party, but you're saying the chair and 1 member of the government party. Is that okay? Just 1 Liberal, other than the chair? Okay, fine.
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres propositions?
Are there any other motions?
Subcommittee now.
I think it's about 6, if I'm not mistaken, counting 5.
5
plus
the chair, which raises the issue.
What's the point?
Well, it raises the point that of the potential for tie votes, which have to get broken by the chair. That may not be an essential point or consideration if we're assuming that all discussions get reported back to the...
Oh yeah, the committee's as you know better than I, probably the committee's the master of its own decisions and are there any other proposals for motions? Motion carried, yeah, but okay, now are there other proposals for motions? Yes. Yeah. Ms. Romanato.
Donc, concernant les réunions sans quorum.
With reference to meetings without a quorum, I move that the chair be authorized to hold meetings to receive evidence in the absence of a quorum, provided that at least 4 members are present, including 1 member from the government party and 1 member from the opposition.
Est-ce qu'il y a des commentaires?
Any comments?
Monsieur Reid.
So I'm assuming with regard to this one that, and forgive me if I'm incorrect, if it's pursuant to the motion adopted on the 7th of June, do we even have discretion not to accept this in its present form? Is it automatically required that we follow this?
Have to, then it's automatic. Okay. Okay, thank you.
I just want to confirm that's correct, though.
Yeah,
That's correct. Okay.
it is. Distribution of, does anyone else? Yes, Mr. Aldag.
So I'll move related to distribution of documents, that only the clerk of the committee be authorized to distribute documents to members of the committee, and only when such documents exist in both official languages, and the witnesses be advised accordingly prior to appearing before the committee. as stated in the document that was handed out.
Any controversy around this? No. Okay. Yes.
This is something which has created problems in the past with regard to notice periods. If we are unreasonably peremptory in our expectation that a witness appear before a committee, a witness who, particularly in this kind of case, is an expert who has a substantial report to make, we would effectively be depriving ourselves of the benefit of the written supplementation to that individual's testimony if we don't give either A, an adequate notice period, or B, have special translation available for what could potentially be lengthier documents than one normally receives. This is a problem which we will face, I think, more here than with a normal committee, and therefore this is not meant to change the wording of the motion. It is meant to put us on our guard that we have to be sensitive to the fact that we may be depriving ourselves of information if we are not sensitive to the timing issues that will arise.
Well, that's a good point, Mr. Reid. What I'm told is, and I've seen it from experience, the witness would still be able to come, but their documents would not be distributed until they were in both official languages, but they would very soon, hopefully, be distributed in both official languages. So that testimony, the committee would still have the benefit of that, well, the verbal testimony and the written testimony in both languages.
Yes, I myself, Mr. Chair, before I became a member of Parliament, was a witness before the Procedure and House Affairs Committee, and I can tell you that at that time, I did not learn of the need to get documents submitted for translation until after it happened. So these problems arise from time to time. It's just good for us to be on our guard.
Good point. Mr. Cullen.
Just very briefly, I think the motion has to be maintained simply because it puts, if we were to ever distribute in one language, it puts certain committee members at a disadvantage over others. If they're able to reference and refer a language in their maternal language, while others simply can't make their way through, my experience has been very similar to the chair's, where the witness is always able to present. I take Mr. Reid's advice that we give them as much warning as possible. Some witnesses just don't heed the advice, and they come, their documents aren't ready in time, they show up morning of. It happens. We can get them translated afterwards, but I think all committee members, regardless of language, should be on the same footing as we hear witness testimony at the time. And I'm sure the clerks will give lots of notice to our witnesses. I've seen it too many times in the past where witnesses just simply don't abide by our advice, and I'm not suggesting that was the case with you, Scott. I'm sure that's not what happened, but I think we just have to be able to hear the witness, as we all do, equally, and then move on and get the documents later as they're translated.
Ms. Mee?
I think particularly in the case of this committee, and I support, obviously, that we ensure that all materials to this committee are available in both official languages, but we are likely to hear from witnesses for whom neither English nor French is their official language. We're likely to hear from German parliamentarians, or we're likely to seek advice from parliamentarians who are Swedish or Danish. Well, Nathan suggests Scottish, but we can have translators available. And so the main thing is that as we accept evidence, the committee have the capacity to translate key information so that it's available in English and French if the witness doesn't have the wherewithal themselves to do so.
Yes, I'm told we have interpreters for languages other than French and English. Good point, because indeed we're studying electoral systems all over the world. So I assume this motion meets with everyone's approval. Does anyone have a motion on working meals?
I move that the clerk of the committee be authorized to make the necessary arrangements to provide working meals for the committee and its subcommittees. Hopefully no disagreement.
It doesn't seem to be. I'll go out on a limb here and suggest that there's consensus around this.
Can this be the first committee to look for local food that is sustainable and ethical? I don't think that's likely, but I thought I'd make a bid.
Well, it's out there. It's out there, and I'm sure that House of Commons administration will take that into account. So can we move on to witnesses' expenses?
Concerning witnesses' expenses, I move that, if requested, reasonable travel and living expenses be reimbursed to witnesses not exceeding two representatives per organization, and that in exceptional circumstances, payment for more representatives be made at the discretion of the chair.
Comments? No. Then I deem the motion carried. Anyone have a motion on staff at in-camera meetings? Yes, Ms. Romanada.
Merci.
Thank you. I move that unless otherwise ordered, each committee member be allowed to be accompanied by one staff person at an in-camera meeting, and that each party represented on the committee also be permitted to have one staff person from its whip's or House Leader's office present. Comments?
No? Alors,
Oh, okay. Carried. Yes, Mr. Aldag.
And I move that the transcript of each in-camera meeting be kept by the clerk of the committee for consultation by members of the committee in the clerk's office.
it's pretty standard. Motion adopted. On notice of motions, yes, Ms. Sahota?
In reference to notice of motions, I move that 48 hours notice be required for any substantive motion to be considered by the committee unless the substantive motion relates directly to business then under consideration. That the notice of motion be filed with the clerk of the committee by 4 p.m. from Monday to Thursday and by 2 p.m. on Friday and distributed to members in both official languages. And I'd like to propose a little bit of an addition to this motion as well, that when the committee is traveling on official business, no substantive motions be moved.
Okay, thank you. Comments? Everyone is fine with the addition as well about motions during travel times? Yes, Mr. You're in agreement? Yeah. Okay, adopted. And now we go to a motion on the time allocation. Mr. Cullen? Yeah, sorry.
I defer to Mr. Cullen. I think we're speaking to the same
Okay.
point now.
Okay, so Mr. Cullen.
So there's two issues I'd like to raise. One, I think Ms. May will cover just in terms of the allocation. This is the allocation of time and how we balance between witnesses and the amount of time that MPs get to ask questions. I have a motion that's a little bit not just about the timing, Chair, but perhaps an innovation that the committee might consider today. We've been talking a great deal about how to make what we do here as open, as accessible as possible to the public. And one of the ideas brought forward from someone online was to allow some access to the public for that same engagement that we have as MPs, and how to do that with technology that we have is possible. And so I have some language for this, Chair. I'll read it out first, and then perhaps we can distribute it for committee's consideration. That the committee allot the equivalent of one MP speaking spot per meeting to hear questions directly from Canadians at each meeting with witnesses, that the committee receive questions from Canadians via the committee's email address and the Twitter hashtag, YourVoteCanada, YourVoteCDA, and that questions be reviewed and selected by the clerk of the committee and posed to the witnesses by yourself, the chair. So just to explain what I'm proposing is that over the course of, or prior to a meeting, we have witnesses testify for a certain amount of time. Canadians who are tuning into this conversation about how we are adapting and evolving our democracy are able to email directly through the clerk's office, and we have the technology obviously to be able to see what Canadians are asking, and that we take one of the slots normally allocated for a member of parliament to ask questions, and the clerk we trust as a nonpartisan actor in this place to be able to vet and offer up 3 or 4 questions perhaps that you, Chair, would then read to the witnesses to allow Canadians direct access to those expertise, those experts, and be able to engage people in a much more forthright way than simply always through their member of parliament or the members that happen to be sitting at this committee. So I have the text, the exact texting of this motion, if you'd like me to distribute or however you'd like to proceed.
Is it in both official languages? Yes.
It is in both official languages.
Yeah, okay, then we'll distribute it. Ms. May, and then Mr. DeCourcy.
I want to speak in favor of this, but my motion is very similar, and I like Nathan's suggestion that it be by Twitter hashtag. My motion suggests a couple of differences from the main one, but I suggested language, which I'm afraid malheureusement c'est pas seulement disponible en anglais à ce moment. My language was followed by 5 minutes of allocated to questions from the public, whether by participating online or otherwise decided by the committee. I think the challenge for this committee in our efforts to engage Canadians is that the more we do things a bit differently, the greater the likelihood the committee's proceedings will be followed, not just for people to input their suggestions, but for people who are curious about the process to learn with us as we learn as MPs about the various options. So allowing Canadians who are watching online, and we know, I say we know, it hasn't come up an official business of the committee, but I've certainly been approached by CPAC. They want to broadcast live, as they do all parliamentary proceedings, this committee online. If there's the first ever opportunity since 1867 for members of the public who are actually so engaged that they want to watch this process televised, that they can say, gee, I wish they'd asked this question because I didn't understand that bit. And if they can send it to us right away, and the clerks can process it and hand it to you, Mr. Chair, to ask that question, I think it will enhance our work enormously, and the likelihood that the committee will reach not just the people who are in the room with us, but tens of thousands more Canadians.
Thank you, Ms. May. Mr. De Courcy?
I want to thank Mr. Cullen and Ms. May for the sentiment of ensuring that this is open and available and accessible to Canadians. And my understanding is that the committee will undertake a comprehensive consultation tour of the country. All 338 members are encouraged to conduct consultations in their riding. I maybe open it up for questioning around the concern that perhaps it's the same person sending in questions time and time again. And I'd also like to propose that maybe this get dealt with at the subcommittee, where they can look at individual meetings and say if there is an opportunity through technology and different communication tools to undertake such a I guess, an avenue. Otherwise, I'd like to think that we need to get to work talking to academics, learning about the deep details of this issue, and make sure that we are ready to open it up to Canadians when the time comes to tour the country.
Thank you. Mr. Cullen?
There's a couple of, I appreciate Matt's comment there. One thing we've worked out some of the timing on this as well as to how the committee would actually do the questioning. So as it wouldn't actually take away any time away from the MPs, so anyone concerned about losing a slot, I know that's sometimes a concern on the government bench. The proposal we're making would not do that in terms of timing. We would have rounds, whether it's a 2-hour one-panel meeting or a 3-hour meeting with 2 panels. Sometimes committees take that form. We've done the math and made it sure that everybody at the committee would also be heard. I take Matt's point that there are consultations being undertaken by MPs in various stages. I suppose what's unique about this is the access to the quality of witnesses we're going to have, the privilege we have as members of Parliament to draw not just from across Canada but around the world. And that one of the things that we've struggled with this particular issue is being able to broaden it and have a greater group of Canadians understand the importance of what it is that we're doing here, Chair. With the advent of these social media technologies, we think that there is as maybe perhaps uncomfortable as it might make some of our clerks to be engaged this way around testimony, I don't actually have a concern about, as Matt raised, but one person again and again asking. I don't think that would be hard to eliminate, I suppose, simply because we would vary who gets to pose the questions that day, and the clerk would be in charge of that. I just imagine us going around. We ask our rounds, the witnesses ask our questions, but a Canadian has a completely different insight than we do as members of Parliament on this question, from a completely different perspective, and that the questions we would get from that public from that way would open up new veins of information and testimony that we had not considered before. It's innovative, I understand, and it might be a bit unusual. Oh, it is unusual. We've never done something like this, but we've never had a committee like this. We've never had a committee in the 149 years of our parliaments that looks like this, discussing what is the foundation of our parliament. So I hear the suggestion of taking it to subcommittee. I'd like us to really embrace this today as an opportunity to try it out. Let's put it this way. The first round that we're going to be looking through here is with expert witnesses, Chair. That's what the committee has considered. Let's try it out. Let's give it a few meetings, see if there's uptick from the public. If the public are engaged and we're seeing a lot of action on Twitter and a lot of emails coming in, then we'll know it's working. And I have no doubt in my mind the quality and the breadth of the questions will be excellent, and I also think they'll be innovative. I think the public will be asking things that we didn't even consider.
Thank you. Mr. Kenny, Ms. May, and Mr. Deltel.
Mr. Chair, my primary concern about this motion is that it proposes a fundamental change in the role and nature of a parliamentary committee, thereby creating a precedent before we've even considered or studied the implications of such a precedent. I can think of a long list of shortcomings in this proposal. There is no effective way of screening a barrage of repetitive questions from a small number of individuals using different accounts, for example. And moreover, this is a parliamentary committee. We are elected by our constituents to do our job as legislators, to deliberate with all of the resources at our disposal, of researchers, of both parliamentary researchers, the Library of Parliament, our own party research resources, to bring to bear our own professional life experience to these issues. We are not here to be conduits for Twitter or other platforms of social media, which are all very interesting and in which there's a robust and sometimes vulgar public debate. If Mr. Cullen feels strongly about this proposal, then I would suggest he can very simply put questions that are emailed to him or his office or proposed to him on social media platforms. There's nothing preventing members from doing that, and that in fact would not be unprecedented. I would recall that the former leader of the third party in the 1993 Parliament, Mr. Manning, frequently posed questions in question period that had been submitted to his office by members of the general public by something prehistoric called the fax machine. Whoa. And so the public used to, members of the public were encouraged to submit questions for question period by fax machine, and Mr. Manning chose, and members of his party periodically chose, to read those questions at question period as opposed to ask their own. So there's nothing barring any member of the committee from doing that, but to set aside time from members who are elected to do this job as deliberative legislators, I think would be a fairly radical change in the character of a parliamentary committee. I'm not opposed to innovation or considering that, but it seems to me the right place to do so would be at the Procedure and House Affairs Committee or some other body which actually considers these questions, which has the luxury of considering procedural questions closely rather than imposing such an innovation on this committee, which should be doing its job deliberatively.
I have Ms. May, Mr. Deltel, Ms. Sahota, and Mr. Cullen again.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je ne veux...
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to repeat what I've already said.
At a committee like this, I've shared this with Mr. Reid. I found very clever member of my staff, found the 1937 proceedings of the Special Committee on Electoral Reform examining proportional representation and whether we should change our voting system, and including members who were in parties of fewer than 12 MPs. So one thing that they didn't have in 1937 was access to immediate questions from people across the country who could be watching the witnesses and sending in their questions. I take Jason's points entirely, but I don't think this is radical. It's still a parliamentary committee. It's still those of us around the table who hear the question posed and hear the witness's answer and are able to take that into consideration as we form our report. So I don't think it's in any way a radical deviation from parliamentary procedure, but I want to mention one demographic that would pay a lot of attention to that, and that's Canada's youth. If we create a way to get young people interested in something that a lot of people over their summer are going to think is pretty dry stuff, a special committee on electoral reform, imagine if young people across Canada actually start tuning in and sending us questions. I think it's an innovation that will help the legitimacy of this process.
Merci, Monsieur Deltel.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Deltel. Yes, Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cullen, technically, this is the first time a parliamentary committee has dealt with this specific issue. It's not the first time that we've operated with motions that were slightly different from routine. For example, the Medical Assistance in Dying Committee, that was a joint committee of the House and the Senate. There were 2 chairs. It was very nonpartisan. So there are new ways of doing things. Our question is really, well, when we were dealing with a very sensitive item, I had my phone with me and I was receiving comments directly from people. And without revealing any secrets, I had some former colleagues from the National Assembly who were feeding me with some comments and even suggesting some questions. So that was interesting. But be that as it may, this motion would affect the amount of time members get at a meeting. Which member? Would it be a government minute? What we were handed out was provided for 7 minutes. But what would it be? Would this cut into the 3 minutes to be given the NDP, or whose time would this come out of? It would have to be very clear. Mr. Kenny raised some very serious issues about identifying people using Twitter or Facebook. We've all been victims of people posing as friends on Facebook or Twitter. So is there any way to screen these questions to see whether it's a genuine individual, or is it a group that's trying to subvert the process in some way? This is a noble intent, getting Canadians involved, those watching CPAC and so on, inviting them to ask a question directly. But in practice, this could be quite challenging. The same thing comes to the ultimate choice. We all have confidence in and respect the work of the analysts and the clerks. I've been impressed by the professionalism and quality of these people, the people who provide us with all the documents as well. This hasn't always been the case in my experience in government. So I have questions about this. I think it might not be a bad idea for the steering committee to look into this, to weigh the pros and cons. This is an interesting proposal, but I'm not really sure. I think we need to think about it. I think we need to be a bit cautious to make sure that this really works and see if there isn't a way to actually do what Mr. Cullen aspires to do, but I think that some more thought is needed, and I think it might be more appropriate for the steering committee to deal with this. Mr. Deltel, am I to understand that you'd like to amend the motion and have this matter reviewed by the steering committee? Ms. Sahota.
Proposal, and I've been going through it back and forth in my mind while I'm sitting here, and I think this is a special committee, so we are trying to do things differently after a very long time, and it would be interesting to hear about what Canadians think and have them have input into our committee, how the clerks would go about doing that and weeding people out to the concerns that have been raised. Those are going to be some challenges, but I don't, it's some political questions, decisions would have to be made as well in some regard, but I'm confident that the clerks would be able to maybe bring a balance of questions each time and also not pick any repetitive questions. And if that's done, then I think I could see it working out. But yeah, so I just wanted to add in my opinion that I think it's innovative and it's interesting. But if it wasn't to happen, I'm also confident that each of us here at this table should also be, going to these sources such as Twitter and listening to the questions that Canadians are asking, and through us would be able to ask the witnesses those questions as well. So there's many approaches we can take, and we are all going to be required to do town halls on the matter as well. So it's interesting, and I'm definitely considering this option.
Thank you. Mr. Cullen.
Because I know there were some concerns raised about how this would function, we wanted to keep it very simple. So imagine a 2-hour meeting. We would have perhaps 5 witnesses, which could testify 7 minutes, and then use 11 MP slots of 7 minutes each for questioning. And then the very last slot, or one of those, a 12th, be for a public series of questions. We rely on the clerks all the time, by the way, for those less familiar with the committee, to provide nonpartisan information and be able to weed out, as Jason and others have concerned themselves with, anything repetitive or hyper partisan in nature. And they do it all the time and do an incredible job, and have for many years. In terms of it being radical, which, you know, one looks at the etymology to go to the roots of the issue. We ask Canadians to embrace change all the time as legislators. We propose new laws. We ask in elections consistently for Canadians to vote one way, vote another way, think about issues in a different way. So far be it from us not to consider doing things differently as well. And I would say that Proc would be welcome to come and study us and see how this example went, to see if it would actually work at defense and transport. I don't see, in terms of the cost benefit, if we were to try it for 5 meetings, 10 meetings, and the questions were difficult to vet, there weren't any questions coming from Canadians, which I find hard to believe, or it just simply, for whatever reasons, committee members didn't feel like it was working to our benefit or to the benefit of this study, then we abandon the exercise. But in terms of the benefit, it could potentially open up a new avenue for us, again, for questions that we weren't contemplating. The setting of the example at this committee is fine. I'll commit to, as Mr. Kenny has said, we are all open to this. At Nathan Cullen, I'll commit at least one of my questions every day to someone coming in from social media to pose to the witnesses. I think we should be welcoming it, not just in our personal work as committee members, but just how this committee goes about this issue, because this is not ours. This entire conversation belongs to Canadians. Why wouldn't we take an opportunity, a low-risk opportunity, to open the door a little bit further to Canadians who wish to participate? As Elizabeth said, electoral reform on July 21st might not light up the airwaves on CBC, maybe CPAC, but we want to be able to engage people with all means possible, particularly if there's very little downside. And on this, I see very little downside. And I take certainly my role as legislator very seriously, and I know my responsibilities in terms of voting on, considering, and passing legislation.
Mr. Cullen. Mr. De Courcy.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen. Mr. De Courcy.
Listening correctly, there's a willingness to make sure that Canadians are heard right throughout this process, and I want to ensure the same. I wonder how to do this, but we had circulated a potential speaking rotation for consideration. I wonder if we can consider these two pieces together, looking at the speaking rotation and then adding the opportunity for public input at the end of the session. And it would take some stick handling to ensure that meetings were set up properly so witnesses had enough time to speak, that the principle of allowing every member of the committee to speak was met, and that we were also listening to Canadians. So that would maybe be a question for the subcommittee to put together as a whole, and I would ask the clerk for her input on how that was together. And I don't know if I have to make an amendment to the motion on the table to try and present these together and deliver that motion, but I'm willing to do that to ensure that we find a way to allow members the opportunity to ask questions and as well engage Canadians.
There's just a moment. I'm just trying to sort my way through this. Mr. Reid, you have a point of order?
I'm procedurally speaking, I'm not sure if it's a point of order. You can cut me off if I'm going the wrong direction with this, but there's a separate motion dealing with time for opening remarks and questioning witnesses, which I think is what Mr. De Courcy is talking about folding into this. while I appreciate what he's trying to do, I suggest that it would be outside the scope of this particular motion to expand to cover that motion. And it's, in a way, it's unfortunate we didn't deal with these in reverse, but I would suggest we try and deal with this, and then we turn to that motion simply because it allows us to deal with a number of things that aren't contemplated in this motion, such as the overall length of time for the rounds with witnesses, that sort of thing.
Do you agree, Mr. De Courcy, to treat these two items separately?
So just for clarification, we would vote on the motion to open the opportunity for Canadians to ask questions and then move to the specific time allocation for witnesses, questioning, and where, if passed, the questioning would be put for Canadians.
That last point about Canadians' participation is what Mr. Cullen's
I guess
motion.
what I'm asking is, can we put those together? That's what I'm asking, and move it as part of one motion. I don't know if it can be seen as friendly from the other side or from the mover.
I'm told it's a bit dicey. It's a bit difficult to do that kind of merger of these two, somewhat unrelated motions.
Could we table this motion, move to the speaking order, and then see if we can move the opening for Canadians in?
Well, as I understand it, there's a couple of things we can do, and our clerk will correct me if I'm wrong. We could essentially amend the motion to say that it should be sent to the steering committee for further discussion. Is that correct? Is that yeah? Or if Mr. Cullen had unanimous consent, he could withdraw it, but I don't think that's what his objective is. So those, I think, are the two options. We could, with an amendment and a vote, send it to the steering committee and hash it out there, if you will. But is that correct? Yeah, okay. So Monsieur Thériault, Monsieur Reid, Madame May, Monsieur Deltel, Madame May encore.
Oui.
Yeah, just very quickly. The Quebec experience in 2003 to 2007 included citizens on the committee. So ordinary Quebecers could ask the witnesses questions, and indeed, at times, the tack that the questioners took was very different from what the MLAs were taking, or the MNAs. I share the concerns of the Conservative Party because we mustn't diminish the work of elected officials on a committee like this one. We are duly elected, and at times in public life, we get the feeling that with the cynicism among the public and so on, that things that aren't parliamentary are somehow more legitimate. But without getting into that, as long as this participation isn't used for, this public participation isn't politicized, I have no problem with it. And I have no problem either with the subcommittee addressing this. We're talking about screening the most relevant questions in, and so hopefully the questions would be different from the kinds of questions we're asking. That was what I wanted to say. Okay, so if you want this referred to the steering committee, someone has to move an amendment to the motion in order for this to be referred to the steering committee. Mr. Reid?
Let's try.
Yeah, we'll try.
So the sense that I'm getting is that there's concern from some of my Conservative colleagues. There's some willingness, certainly strong support from Madame May and perhaps from the Bloc, and some openness from the Liberals, if I were sort of recounting the conversation to this point. So if it would expedite the process of this committee being struck and being able to talk about what happens next over the next couple of weeks, if it would aid committee members that we put this to the subcommittee, we can have a conversation. If there's at least if I can get a confirmation from my colleagues, there's a willingness to consider this seriously, to work with the clerk's office to make sure that there aren't any logistical, and then we can simply follow it up later with a conversation and have a vote on it or something, that we don't let it simply slide off the table is my one concern. And so I'm seeing some commitment from around the table for that. If that would expedite our process today, Chair. I don't want to take up our whole time on this one particular aspect.
So you would withdraw it?
I'd simply table it to the subcommittee. Once we strike a subcommittee, once the committee has its first confirmed meeting, steering committee, excuse me.
I'm told someone else, we could do that, but someone else would have to move an amendment
I suspect
to the motion to do that. But, just one moment. Right now, you're on the list, Mr. DeCourcy?
I'd like to move an amendment. To
No, I think we have to go through Mr. Reid, Ms. May, Mr. Deltel, and then yourself. Mr. Reid.
My intention had been actually to raise the matter that I raised via a point of order, so I've actually should be struck off the list.
Ms. May.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had prepared a motion that speaks to all the elements of time for opening remarks and questioning of witnesses, relating to how much time we'd give in the opening, and of course, rounds of questioning for allocation of times that includes all the members around this table. I can present that now, or if it's the will of the committee to follow Nathan Cullen's advice, and that this motion for opening remarks, questioning of witnesses, and the public participation potential around the table all go to the subcommittee, then I won't take the time of the committee to read out my motion. But I think we need more time for witnesses than an initial 10 minutes, which is the routine around this place.
Mr. Deltel.
Mr. Deltel, I'd like to reassure Mr. Cullen that I was very serious when I moved that this be studied by the steering committee. If I thought it was frivolous, we wouldn't have given it any thought. We would have just dismissed the idea. But it's a good idea, and I think it has to be done right. We have to think about this. Goes to the very heart of our institutions. There's nothing more delicate or fragile than that in a democracy. We mustn't be hasty in our consideration. It's an interesting idea. It's a good idea. But as Mr. Kenny said, we already routinely incorporate comments from the public and from the media in our work. We have to take the time to really consider this seriously, and that's why we want the steering committee to deal with it, to look at it, even the mechanics of it, the chronology of it. When will this be done? How will this be done? Will it be proportional to the time that the respective parties would normally get, including the Bloc and the Greens? So there's a lot of things that need to be looked at formally, and questions have to be addressed. That's why it's our opinion that this should be done seriously, thoughtfully, carefully analyzed and assessed so that it's relevant. And if it's relevant, then the steering committee could make recommendations, and then we can adopt those if we want. But I really don't think we should rush this. I don't think that would really be doing a service to the work we've been called upon to do in the coming months. Okay, so you've moved a motion then, do I take it, to have this referred to the steering committee? Yeah, you can consider it to be that if you want. I'm just thinking out loud. Sure, that the steering committee study the possibility of well, I don't know technically how to word it. Perhaps the clerks could help me out here.
Donc, on me dit que...
Okay, I'm told we could say that the matter be referred to the steering committee for study. All right then. Just a minute.
OK, alors on va passer au vote.
Okay, we can vote on the amendment that the steering committee study the matter, the possibility of, wait a second, that the committee recommend the motion be studied by the steering committee. Okay, that's the clerk will figure it out, but that's the idea. You get the gist of it.
OK, alors on va voter sur...
Okay, we're going to vote on Mr. Deltel's amendment.
Tous ceux qui sont d'accord?
All those in favor?
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Alors, la question...
Okay, the matter is referred to the steering committee. Thank you, colleagues.
Alors maintenant, on peut passer à cette...
Now, we can move... Yes?
Now, or is it something else?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So why don't we just take the one that's in the was circulated to us?
Okay, would you like me to read it? That witnesses be given 10 minutes to make their opening statement, and that during the questioning of witnesses, the time allocated to each questioner be as follows. For the first round of questioning, 7 minutes to a representative of each party in the following order: Liberal Party, Conservative Party, NDP, and Liberal. For the second round, 5 minutes be allocated in the following order: Conservative Party, Liberal Party, Conservative Party, Liberal Party, followed by NDP for 3 minutes. That's how it reads here. Is that what you're moving?
So yes.
Okay. Mr. De Courcy.
I'd like to propose an amendment to that, or if a motion was so moved, to ensure that we reflect the composition of the committee, ensure everyone has an opportunity to speak, and I'm hopeful as well we will find the time through the subcommittee process to ensure that we find a way to engage Canadians in this process. But I move, I amend the motion so that witnesses have 10 minutes to present, followed by a first round of questions, 6 minutes Liberal, 6 minutes Conservative, 6 minutes NDP, 6 minutes Bloc, 6 minutes Green, 6 minutes Liberal, followed by a second round, 5 minutes Conservative, 5 minutes Liberal, 5 minutes Conservative, 5 minutes Liberal, 5 minutes NDP, 3 minutes Bloc, 3 minutes Green. And that was the sheet that we circulated prior to this meeting.
So,
Ms. May just got it now. Okay. Okay.
Mr. Chair, I appreciate the amendments to reflect the obvious that there are full members of this committee from the Green Party and the Bloc Québécois. And as full members, there is no justification for 3 minutes Bloc and 3 minutes Green on the second round. Our allocation of times in terms of the number of questions, the amount of time should be equal, even if the number of time slots is not. I think that my proposal had been, and perhaps this is the right time to go through it, I've given a copy to the clerks, but unfortunately, I apologize, it was only drafted in English, so my proposal had been, number one, that witnesses be given 30 minutes for their opening statement, that it be 7 minutes Liberal, Conservative, NDP, Bloc, Green, Liberal. Second round, 5 minutes Conservative, Liberal, NDP, Bloc, and Green, and then 5 minutes for questions from the public. So that's my proposal. And in the 30 minutes piece is for assuring that we have adequate time to hear from experts. But it might be possible that the question of the opening time also be flagged, the opening time for witnesses be flagged, and have that go to the subcommittee to consider whether that be at the discretion of the chair. But I would like to see us recognize that for some people who spent their lifetime studying electoral reform, to have only a 10-minute presentation will be inadequate to their expertise. And perhaps, you know, while we're going across the country and hearing from as many people as possible, we may want to have 10-minute presentations. But when we solicit the opinion of experts, we should want more than 30. Want more than 10, rather, and go to 30 minutes. But, I mean, it is possible that we go to shorter times for Bloc and Green, but I want to make sure that we recognize that we're not junior members on the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, would anyone like to, okay, Mr. De Courcy and Mr. Aldag.
I want to thank Ms. May for the intervention there, and I apologize that hadn't got around in front of your eyes as I spoke. There's certainly no intention to treat any any member with any disparage over another. This is just to ensure that every member of the committee at least gets one chance to speak during each round of questioning. I do think that 10 minutes can be enough for a quality witness, and then it begets us all to ensure that we have good questions ready to go, and certainly there's upwards of an hour and a little bit of questioning on top of the witness testimony. So I'm confident in this process. Certainly, it's not unmovable for me, but I am confident that this does give us adequate time to adequately question witnesses and hear from them on their expertise. Merci beaucoup.
Mr. Aldag.
Just to build on what Matt has said, I'm concerned about 30 minutes. We could fill our entire summer. Now we're going to hear very important information from our witnesses, but I wonder if we could keep their allotted time to 10, keep it tight, but invite the written submissions. There could be a lot of information that can be given to us that we can still pull into our final report. I really think we need to be aware of the amount of time that we can give to each witness. So I'd rather keep the presentation piece a bit tighter and have time allotted for us to do the questioning, but to invite written submission to round out the information that we're hearing from the witnesses.
Thank you. Mr. Cullen.
So I was just clarifying with Ms. May, was it 30 minutes? Because originally when I read this, it was 30 minutes for the witnesses, but I think she's suggesting 30 minutes each witness. That I would agree with what John just said. Just if I look at a panel of 5 witnesses, we're 2.5 hours in, potentially, before we start to have the exchange. And I've been one over time to enjoy the exchange, not necessarily more than sometimes the opening statements, but it's an exchange, and so you can sort of probe into something that's been said. Chair, my question is simply because we've deferred one aspect of how the committee is going to function with witnesses, how we're going to do questions and lineup, that we also send this there, because the two are, in fact, as was said earlier, connected. If we do end up doing with a public piece in our lineup or not, will affect the timing allocation. So we could go through this whole debate now, pass a motion that says this many minutes here, this many minutes there. Subcommittee decides to do something different. We're back to the same conversation and then have to adjust what we just decided on. So why not send both of these 2 questions to the subcommittee? That's a typical job of a steering committee to do. They'll come back to us, and of course it'll always be put back to the main committee to decide and agree to or modify whatever the steering committee comes up with, rather than spend all of our time here today doing that.
Are you proposing a
friendly, yes,
a
very friendly amendment to just suggest that the conversation is good. It's important that we get some allocation of time that's fair and that we get to do our jobs properly. Yet this thing that we just sent to the steering committee will inevitably be connected to this conversation. So it's the same amendment that Mr. Deltel moved on my motion to Madame May's, or this main motion that I think Scott started this off.
So, Ms. May? Yes.
Yeah. Just to step back, and Mr. Chair, I appreciate the latitude to speak to this a little bit more. In the past, and I don't mean the dim recesses of time like 1937, but the times I remember, parliamentary committees did not have a forced march of witnesses through the process as quickly as possible. And not every witness was put on a panel. I actually, to make sure my memory wasn't false on this point, I tried figuring out who could I phone. I called a former member of Parliament, Karen Kraft Sloan, with whom I worked when she was on the Environment Committee long ago. And I said, in the old days, didn't witnesses get like a half an hour or 20 minutes? She said, yeah, at least 20 minutes, depending on the witness. I think latitude is needed. If we, for instance, engage the person who's the top on my proposed list of witnesses, which we haven't gotten to, and certainly, but Professor Arndt Leiphardt, and those of us who've studied electoral reform for a long time, I know, gosh, that Scott Reed would know this witness. This man has spent his life studying the effect of voting systems on empirical evidence of how governments and parliaments perform, and is there a statistical alignment between how people vote and how well their country does economically? Very interesting questions, but complex, and lots of data, and 36 countries that were studied. It would be a huge loss to our opportunity to learn to hold a witness like that to a 10-minute presentation. On the other hand, We could have lots of witnesses that want to come to us when we do public hearings across the country, and I take Nathan's point and others that 10 minutes may be more than enough when we dive in with questions later. So I'd really support this going to the subcommittee to figure out if there's a way to say with latitude the chair can have longer presentations from the witnesses that we've sought out where we agree by consensus. That's someone we really need a lot of time with that person, and forcing them to 10 minutes for a lifetime of work is both a loss to us and an insult to the witness.
Okay, I'm told if there is a desire on the part of the committee to refer this to the steering committee, the mechanics, I'm told, would be the following: that we have unanimous consent to withdraw the motion as amended, and then a motion to refer the question to the steering committee. So is there unanimous consent to withdraw the motion as amended? Seems to be.
Consequences of that is, I think the next person on the speaking slot, who is myself, loses his space.
Well, then why don't we go to you first?
I appreciate that. Yeah, thank you. I just want to get on the record as pointing out that the original motion, which was put forward by us, by the impartial folks, the clerks, had the effect of giving out vote total or question time totals that cause the Conservatives and the Liberals both to lose some time. The Bloc and the Green Party both get more time than would be allocated to them based upon their percentage of the seats, rather the vote they got in the last election. NDP's down a little bit. It's not too bad, actually. But it's not off by that much, is what I should say here, Mr. Cullen commenting. The system proposed by the Liberals adjusts that so that they take a lesser hit and the Conservatives take a more substantial hit to the percentage of time if we are basing this all on the principle of proportionality, which is the fiction we are expected to believe with regard to how this committee is being run. That is a disappointment. I can certainly understand why, in their own self-interest, the Liberals would want to move to something that gives them more and the Conservative Party less than in the motion proposed by the impartial people who designed this system for us. But I am at a loss as to determine why that should be regarded as fair by anybody else. As for the Liberals' suggestion that they had circulated something beforehand, they did indeed circulate something beforehand, and my understanding from our staff members is that it was not that which they wound up presenting here. And if this is going to be the pattern of behavior from the Liberal Party on this committee, that is a very significant problem. We need to work closely and honestly and openly and know that when somebody makes an assertion in public about what they've done in private, that it actually reflects the facts. I'm very disappointed to see that being the case. Having said that, I have no objection to sending this matter off to the subcommittee.
Okay, so you're in agreement with withdrawing the motion as amended? Okay. Do we need to have a formal vote, or no? I think there's Mr. De Courcy.
I'd just like to mention that the initial suggestion for voting that was given to us by the clerk and the library did not recognize the Greens or the Bloc as legitimate members on this committee, and it was the proposal that we put in front of this House that recognized the need for every member of this committee to have an opportunity to ask questions, recognizing as well that the Bloc and Green would have a second chance to ask questions as sole members of this committee. I look forward to working with Mr. Reid collaboratively and collectively to help find a made-in-Canada solution to reform our electoral system, but just thought I would clarify that so that that was clear on the record. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I can sneak in on the record to thank you, Matt, for putting forward that Bloc and Green get questions. I think that was to be automatically assumed and needed to be amended at this committee, so I appreciate you doing it. Just to put on the record, I'm more concerned about making sure that we have time for witnesses first evidence than questions than the way we go around in rounds. Your proposal is fine on that, actually.
Monsieur Thériault.
Mr. Thériault. Yeah, I'd just like to say that in the defense of those who prepared this document, I did read that those were just standard form proposals. In no way does it reflect their intention to exclude my colleague or myself from the Greens and the Bloc. I wanted that on the record. I appreciate the discussion and the attempts to find a way to free up some time legitimately for the Bloc and the Green Party to participate. And I hope that we'll be able to proceed swiftly and refer this to the steering committee. Okay, that's fine. Understood. Thank you.
Reported generosity towards the Greens and Bloc Québécois in the Liberal changes to the draft motions that have been put forward for us by the clerk's office. My back-of-the-envelope math tells me that the Bloc and Greens would each have had 7 minutes out of a grand total of 63 minutes. Am I right here? I'm sorry, 58 minutes of witness questioning time. 58 minutes. Now they will get a grand total of 9 minutes out of a larger questioning period of 67 minutes, which works out to 13%. So that 1%, it's not nothing, but I suspect that it is not as important as the additional 4% that the Liberal Party is getting. 4 times as much. That's right. There you go.
So, if I may just try to understand here, you are in favor, Mr. Reid, of withdrawing the motion as amended and sending it to the steering committee. Okay, so and I think there's general agreement based on what I've heard for doing that. Now we would need a motion, if we want to go ahead and do that, we would need a motion to refer this question to this steering committee. Monsieur, well, wait. The opening remarks and questioning of witnesses be sent to the steering committee. Does Mr. Boulris, vous voulez proposer la motion, c'est ça?
Mr. Boulris, did you want to move the motion? Yes, very well put. Thank you. Okay, shall we proceed to the vote? Okay, we'll do that. By show of hands, those for? Everyone. Great. Okay, we've gone through all of the routine motions now.
Okay, so colleagues, now we can discuss, and it will be up to us to decide if we want to do so in public or in camera. We can, if you wish, discuss the working calendar of the Special Committee on Electoral Reform. So, oui, Monsieur Thériault?
Oui, j'ai une proposition.
Yes, there's a motion I'd like to move. I tabled it earlier. Oh, yeah, you're right. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, I have a few copies here that I could distribute. This process is cumbersome. It's going to take a lot of time. The person with me today, for example, is dealing with all the blocks, whip load and research for various members. So the motion is as follows, that supplementary resources be allotted to the Bloc and to the Green parties so that they can see to their research and drafting needs in order to help these members right up until this committee reports to the House. Having been through the Quebec experience, we had given the ADQ member extra resources for research and communication. And for the time being, the members of the bloc have seen their budget, they've had their budget's been cut by 20%. So it would be an awful lot to ask the bloc members to dig deeper into their constituency budgets. We're talking about reform to democratic institutions. So I'm asking for a bit of openness. I'm asking for, I think, what I would consider to be reasonable accommodation. So your motion is that additional resources be freed up for the Bloc Québécois and the Green Party so that they can see to their drafting and research needs to help their members on this committee right up until this committee reports to the House. Any comments? No comments? Okay. Well, then we'll vote. All those in favor of the motion? Okay. Ms. Sahota.
I just have a question. I'm for the chair, for the clerks, for everybody on this committee. Is this a matter that we can actually deal with here, or is this for the Board of Internal Economy? Can we even vote on this matter?
That is a good question. It will no doubt factor in, the answer would factor into the way members would vote, I suppose. Does anyone have any light to shed on this, Mr. Cullen?
I was just trying to reflect on little experience I've had. I mean, the committee can certainly request allocate funds for travel, for witnesses to come before us. I think this goes beyond our mandate to allocate funds over the very noble pursuits that were talked about. But I don't know if I don't know if we have the power to do it. B, I'm not sure I'm comfortable doing it, even if we did.
Okay. Il faudrait qu'on
We'll have to do some checking. We don't have the answer off the cuff. Mr. Theriault? Well, it might be a good idea, since people seem open to the request. Perhaps the committee could speak with one voice and find out if it's even possible. So that would be an indication that the committee members might vote in favor of this motion. But as to where it should go, the procedure in House Affairs, I don't know. I have no problem with that. Well, I'm told there's a problem in that the motion doesn't call on anyone in particular. It doesn't call on the committee. Well, I can fix that easily. I spoke a number of times with the parliamentary secretary, and I had informed him of our intent to table this kind of request, and I was told that I could do it within our meeting this afternoon. So these are the housekeeping routine motions that a committee adopts. Clearly, it's this committee I'm calling on for the extra resources. It's a routine motion. It's a housekeeping matter. We're talking about from the committee's operating budget. Could the clerk perhaps look into this, look into whether this is properly worded and whether it's in order? Would you give her a little bit of time to confirm that this motion is in order as it stands, or do you want to go straight to the vote? Well, look, there's two things. You're giving me an opportunity to do two things here. There's been no discussion among colleagues. I don't know whether they intend to view this as a legitimate request. But let's not mix the form and the substance of this motion. If people agree in substance, well, then the form is another. We can perhaps tinker with it. Well, I'm being told that on the question of whether this motion's in order, it's up to the chair. So I would ask you for a little bit of time. I need to verify whether this is in order as it currently stands. Is okay. Yeah, no, does that bother, is that okay with you? No, it's okay. That will give me time to check. Thank you, Mr. Terrio. I'll look into it. Okay. Would you like to discuss the calendar or any issues with the calendar? Ms. Romanado.
My suggestion is, seeing as we have quite a bit of information that is being sent to the subcommittee, which will then impact the calendar and the setting of the calendar, that perhaps we submit a motion to select a date for the next subcommittee at a mutual time that would be beneficial for the members of the committee.
Do you have a date to propose?
My suggestion would be Wednesday, June 29th in the morning, seeing as there might be quite a few of us here on the Hill.
Yes, I believe there's something happening that day, beyond the meeting of the steering committee of the special. Okay, so your proposal is that we meet on Wednesday morning, the 29th, at a time, I guess, to be set by the clerk, or do we set the time here?
By the chair.
By the chair. Is everyone in agreement with that? Mr. Cullen, Mr. Boulris, and Madame May.
Two things. One, I don't know what the openness was like, but I thought tomorrow morning, or later today. I mean, the only reason being this is that once the subcommittee meets, it starts the whole ball rolling in terms of the clerk's ability to start inviting. And my suspicion is that in that initial list of witnesses, which the parties have all submitted, there'll be some clear common ground witnesses, people that are clearly the ones that we would like to get started first, and that some of them, not all of them, but some of them are located within a couple of hours drive or in Ottawa itself. And I could imagine if we were to get together next week, as you said, with the President Obama coming, there'll be a number of MPs in town, that our first committee meeting with witnesses could actually be struck within the week. Because normally when committees do that first couple of meetings, there's a certain pro forma group of witnesses that we could seek. So that was my suggestion.
Yeah.
If the steering committee could get together actually even sooner than that.
What about this, Mr. If I may interrupt?
Sure.
Because I think it's possible to start meetings next week.
Yes.
With some witnesses who could appear on very short notice.
That's right.
The analysts could speak to us for
Sure.
90 minutes. And then I'm told that the...
You just shocked the analyst chair. Well done.
But present to us in a 90-minute session. Sorry about that. And then I believe the committee's directorate could come and speak to us about the use of technology in this process. So we could do that. Let's say the subcommittee met, Tuesday afternoon or something. We could have a meeting, or Tuesday morning. We could have a meeting Tuesday afternoon. We could also invite Mr. Mayrand and Mr. Kingsley,
Sure.
and they could appear on very short notice. So we could hit the ground running next week.
And that would be my intention. Is certainly if we then, depending on the committee's deliberations about what we're doing through July and August, if we want to start that process off, the sooner we let the subcommittee make those decisions, the better. If I could add one thing, I don't know if it came around, Chair, in the discussion we had before about the online participation of Canadians. There was a motion just beneath that. In some of our conversations with Elections Canada, the committee has to invite Elections Canada to prefer witnesses to us. And I think it would be appropriate for us to move a motion. We have to actually, I think we have to have a request, an official request from the committee asking Elections Canada for any insight they have on witnesses they think would help. In our conversations, Elections Canada's best experience is actually internationally not their best. Their best experience is here in Canada. They have extensive experience internationally dealing with other electoral districts, other countries. So this motion that you'll see is marked number 3, to seek a list of witness recommendations from the Chief Electoral Officer for the committee's consideration, including individuals and organizations with expertise related to potential new voting technologies, international cases, increasing public engagement and participation in voting, and others at his discretion. So this is, other than from the committee, they will not entertain a request for witnesses So that's the motion that we wanted to bring today to at least, c'est le troisième dans ta
Donc,
liste.
vous voulez la proposer?
It's the third one on the list. It's the second, actually, number 3. Yes. We have Ms. Romanetto's motion. Could you reread it, please?
A little bit sideways. So my suggestion was that the steering committee, we set a date and time for next week, with the following day having a meeting of the committee of the whole, so that we could start moving along with perhaps having a presentation from the analysts as well as witnesses that might be, available to meet. And at that same notion that we make sure that all suggestions for witnesses be submitted, perhaps if they haven't already been done so by this Thursday, so that we can start get a better understanding of the scope of how many witnesses we're going to have to invite, so that we can start laying out the agenda and the work plan that would be required, so that when we do meet as a committee, that we have that information available so that we can hit the ground running.
I don't know procedurally how to go about this, but would it be possible to propose a time and day in your motion, to propose a time and day for, well, for parties to submit witnesses? You suggested Thursday. A time and day for the steering committee to meet, and I think there might be an agreement with doing it early next week, and then a time and day for the analysts to brief us, and the committee's directorate to brief us on the possible uses of technology, and then a time and day, and it could all be the same day, for Mr. Mayran, Mr. Kingsley to appear. Can you? And in the meantime, yes. Yeah.
At the risk of being a stickler, those cannot possibly be amendments, being so broadly beyond the scope of a motion, which was simply to have the steering committee meet on the 29th of June at, I believe, 11 a.m. or whatever the time was.
Okay.
We can have multiple motions that deal with those things, but the first motion...
Let's start with the steering committee, yeah. Okay, so your recommendation was to have the steering committee meet on the 29th?
That is correct. So have the steering committee meet on the 29th, but prior to that, so if the members of this committee could submit to the clerk their witness list no later than, say, end of day this Thursday, so that could be brought forward to the steering committee.
Okay. So Thursday and the 29th, those are the two
That's
key
correct.
dates. You know what? Let's start with the steering committee.
So the subcommittee would meet on Wednesday, the 29th at 10 a.m.
Okay. And would anyone like to... Monsieur Boulris?
Mr. Boulris.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we should have a motion for the subcommittee or the steering committee to meet next week so that we can start hearing from witnesses quickly next week. That's a good idea. I think it's a step in the right direction. We've got to get moving. And we in the NDP think we can take the beginning of the early summer to hear from academics and experts who will give us an idea of all the different models out there, and we need to agree on our vocabulary to try to avoid confusion when we're discussing these concepts. And then by mid-August, we can go to another stage where we travel and we meet with Canadians before we do our own consultations in our own ridings. So you agree with the 29th at 10 a.m. to start with? Any other comments? Yes, Ms. May? Well, I think, like Mr. Cullen said, I prefer to get to work perhaps even later today with the steering committee. Why not? We're all here. After all, we're here already. And we'll all be here on the 29th for the President's address.
This afternoon, tomorrow, it would be much preferable. We've lost a lot of time. Summer looms. None of us, at least for me, and I don't want to make myself a special case, I can't plan anything from now till December 1st so we have some idea of calendar, and I'd love to be able to see that moving ahead more quickly. And to meet on the 30th is certainly fine as the committee, but for many of us who have a long way to travel to be back in our ridings for Canada Day, my community first Canada Day event is the afternoon of the 30th. Of course, I will cancel anything in order to be participating in this committee fully. I will not miss a meeting. I will be here all the time. But I hate to break it to the community that's expecting me to be there for opening Canada Day events that I can't make it because the committee's first meeting is the 30th.
Are you proposing an amendment to Ms.
I'm opposing this motion. I'm opposing this motion and substituting that the steering committee should meet much sooner.
Okay, got it. Okay, now we have Ms. Romanato. Ms. Romanato?
So I agree that the time is of the essence, which is why I'm proposing that the next time that I know that folks will be in Ottawa, that we absolutely sit down and meet. And I was proposing maybe the morning of the 30th that we actually have the full meeting. My question will be is if we were to have a meeting of the subcommittee, so our steering committee, comité directeur, whatever you want to call it, that would we have enough content to have that meeting tomorrow? Would we be prepared? Do we have all the witness lists? Because if we're going to start mapping out our summer, we need to have that information, and I'm not guaranteed that we actually have that information. And so in order to actually have time to think and look at it, I think we need to give the committee enough time to reflect on that. And I'm not sure if the analysts can prepare things in less than 24 hours.
Yeah. Your motion's still on the floor here. Just in the interest of kind of consolidating things, and I hope I'm not overstepping my bounds, but other options would be, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So it's quite understandable, I think, that Ms. May would want to be in her riding for Canada Day, and all of us do. So, I mean, we could have the steering committee Monday, we could have it Tuesday, we could have it Tuesday morning, and then the analysts and the committee's directorate could brief us Tuesday afternoon, and then we could have Mr. Mayron and Kingsley Wednesday morning. I mean,
I take Ms. Romanando's point very well. We'll get that right eventually, by the way. Why not? If President Obama's here on Wednesday, the steering committee it's a much smaller group. It's not all of us. It kickstarts the process. Wednesday we get a meeting in, 1 or 2, or perhaps Thursday, depending on flights and all the rest of it. And then, at the very least, that subcommittee can propose something by Wednesday as to what the next number of weeks look like, which I think is important to everybody. If this committee is going to go full out and across the board, we got to know that sooner than later. So why not do that? I like your suggestion very much, Chair.
Have the subcommittee Monday or Tuesday?
Tuesday.
Tuesday morning.
Get started.
Ms. Romanato? Ms. Romanato?
Could you clarify? So Tuesday morning would be the steering committee, and then a meeting.
And then we just keep going.
Wednesday and Thursday, and finish Thursday early enough so that folks can be back.
I think the idea is to be out of here Thursday, if possible, because. Yeah. Okay. But the steering committee. But we could invite the analysts on Tuesday afternoon. We could invite Mr. Kingsley on Wednesday morning. I don't know
But just in the spirit of being, and I like the fact that I'm very aware that Scott Reed is right that we're going way off of a motion that's on the floor, but I like thinking outside the box for a moment. Is there any chance that the steering committee could meet this week, tomorrow, or the day after? I'm just wondering if that's a possibility for people. And again, even if we meet Thursday morning early as a committee, I will have to cancel the opening of Canada Day in my riding for my participation. It's okay, I will do it, but British Columbia is a lot farther away than you think. It takes a while.
Again, I think, again, at the risk of overstepping the bounds here, I think we could, based on what I've heard, we could get started Tuesday morning and be out of here, except for Mr. Obama's speech, Wednesday. And people could catch their flights Thursday, and we'd still get a lot of work done. So the way we could proceed, but the committee decides, of course, is Ms. Romanato could withdraw her specific motion. Somebody could present something along the lines of what seems to be gathering consensus, and then we can get on with it. Mr. Cullen?
Perhaps before I propose what you suggested, Chair, Ms. Romanato will withdraw the motion, so I can.
If Ms. Romanato withdraws her motion, you will prepare. Do I understand that you want to present something? Okay.
So I'm happy to withdraw as long as we have a motion that the earliest that I could meet is next Tuesday. My apologies, but
No, I think that would work. I think that would work. Mr. Cullen.
I don't know how to put this in the proper legalese, but that the committee members submit their witness lists by this Thursday. Is that fair for committee members? End of week? Initial. I mean, this is the initial tranche of expert witnesses. Let's say this Friday, to give analysts at least enough time to have that first look at the witness lists. The steering committee meets Tuesday, 10 a.m.
Yep.
With a hope to have the first full committee meeting
Tuesday afternoon.
Tuesday afternoon.
With the analysts.
With the analysts.
And the committee's director. It would be a 3-hour meeting.
Correct. Sounds great.
I just want to mention if we could have the deadline for Thursday because Friday is la fête nationale. It's a holiday.
C'est ça.
Okay.
I knew there was a problem with Friday.
So if I can recap and maybe Mr.
So on a point of order, what was the point Ms. Romanato was making? It sounds excellent, but I didn't catch it until it was done.
Thursday. The witness list.
And the reason for that is?
Fête nationale in Quebec.
Oh, Saint Jean-Baptiste, that's right. Of course, yeah.
Alors, si j'ai bien compris.
So if I understood correctly, perhaps Mr. Cullen, if you wish, you could put that in a motion that you might move that the steering committee, well, first of all, the witness lists have to be submitted, the initial witness lists, by the 23rd. The steering committee will then meet on Tuesday, the 28th. Tuesday the 28th at 10, followed by the first meeting, well, the second meeting actually, of the full committee at 1 p.m. From 1 to, 1 to 4? Yeah, 1 to 4 p.m., a 3-hour meeting. And then the next day, on Wednesday morning, we would invite Mr. Kingsley and Mr. Mayrand. We have some scheduling conflicts, some of us, with what you're proposing. I was wondering if it would be possible to maybe meet for 4 hours on Thursday and then a very short meeting Thursday morning. Well, it's going to take a motion. First of all, we can play around with it, but we need a motion. Is there unanimous consent for Ms. Romanato to withdraw her motion? Yes. Okay. Okay, so we need another motion now.
The recommendations have subcommittee 10 o'clock
Tuesday.
Full committee
Tuesday afternoon 1 to 4.
1 to 4.
For briefings from the analysts and.
I mean, I hate making committee schedules on the go, but we're going to have some flexibility if we're hoping to get something started. Is Tuesday out completely for? Okay. Wednesday morning.
Wednesday morning, the briefing from the analysts.
Mr. Obama is in at the afternoon at 3 or 4 o'clock, I believe. Right. So we go 10 o'clock Wednesday morning for a couple 3 hours.
Probably 9 o'clock we could do that.
9 o'clock, 3 hours Wednesday morning.
Yeah, and then Thursday morning, Mayrand and Kingsley, or that doesn't work for you?
Not working for Madame May.
It doesn't. Look, it's critical that the Electoral Reform Committee get started. I just need to be able to let the folks in my riding know that I won't be at the opening candidate ceremonies Thursday evening. They'll understand. It's just what it is.
No, Thursday morning. Okay. So, Mr. Cullen, do you have a motion to present to us?
That the steering committee meet Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock. That the full committee meet Wednesday morning, 9 o'clock for a 3-hour session. The full committee meets 10 o'clock Wednesday morning for a 3-hour session. Going once. And that's it.
No,
do we want to do a second one?
I thought that included, in all fairness, the drafting was occurring somewhere else than with you, Mr. Cullen, but I thought the suggestion was that the Wednesday meeting be with our analysts.
Yeah, so why not have that 3-hour meeting, the first 90 minutes be with analysts, the second 90 minutes be with Mr. Mayran and Kinsley?
No, I object to that part.
Oh, okay. Sorry, the construction or the witnesses?
To having those witnesses at that time.
Okay. Do you want to?
And I can explain why. There's two reasons. Number one, Mr. Mayran and Mr. Kingsley should not be both put into a 90-minute spot. I don't think they should be at the same meeting. We have a former Chief Electoral Officer who has one set of information to give us, and another current serving Chief Electoral Officer who has many questions that we need to deal with. This is of particular importance to my party, of course, which has tried through the very limited interaction time we've had with Mr. Mayran to establish what would be the deadlines, what would be the issues that would prevent us from having a national referendum on this issue, and having anything less than a full meeting with Mr. Mayran alone would be unacceptable. I note that he never comes before us as a joint witness under other circumstances. I think that that would be reasonable here. Final note on this subject is this. Under the plan, on Tuesday, we designed the rules about how long your presentation will be. Mr. Mayran, in particular, has always emphasized the need to get full information on that well in advance, to do his very careful preparations. Saying to him, you have 24 hours to pull together and restructure everything would just clearly not be acceptable to him. Mr. Kingsley hasn't expressed these concerns in the same way as clearly as Mr. Mayran has, but I suspect that it would be a discourtesy to him to invite him under those circumstances. Okay. Different story with the analysts who are doing a totally different kind of presentation.
Right. Okay, so you're okay with the steering committee with a 3-hour session with the analysts and the committee's directorate, but you're not good with Mayran and Kingsley on the Wednesday together or one after another?
Or indeed with any other external witness.
Got it. Okay, Mr. Cullen?
Signals going on, but I was going to suggest that we just, if Mr. Reid objects to this, I can maybe understand this, but wants to hear from just Mr. Mayran. Would that be something that he'd be open to? I think just sort of setting that context, having the Chief Electoral Officer come forward, it probably is much posing questions, by the way, to us as committee members for what we need to consider when we're going through this, as somebody who runs the elections, as answering our questions. If there's some separation, I don't know if Mr. Reid or other committee members are open to that.
Well,
so
would you like to propose the motion that we do the steering committee on Tuesday at 10?
Right, steering committee meets on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. The
analysts
and right, with the the
committee's directorate.
The committee meets at, I think we landed on 10 o'clock Wednesday. Yes. For an hour and a half, and then an hour and a half with Mr. Mayran.
No. We were talking about having the analysts for an hour and a half.
Yes.
And the committee's directorate for an hour and a half to talk about the use of technologies.
I see.
So that would be a 3-hour block, essentially.
I see. Okay. Well, can we get agreement on that? If we can get agreement on that,
if you propose that motion, we can maybe.
That's the motion I put forward for that 3-hour meeting.
Any comments, or does anyone want to intervene, or? It's okay.
Sorry. So they're both on the same day. You're proposing that they're both on Wednesday? Is that one after the other? Is that
Tuesday morning and Wednesday morning?
Okay. No, for the witnesses that we're talking about right now. So they'd be one after the other, just separated. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that. But
so just so that we're all clear, 10 a.m. Tuesday, the steering committee, 10 a.m. Wednesday, the researchers and the committee's directorate. And what about Mr. Mayran? Did you have anything to say about Mr. Mayran? No, nothing. We'll leave it at that.
Just start with this one piece first, and then move on to Mr. Mayran.
Everything that's in the motion, as I now understand it, is good, with one small exception. We should not presuppose the 90-minute slots because we haven't actually worked out the exact the discussion of the rotations, how long slots are, whether members of the public go at the end, all that stuff. So can we just say they will be separated? One will happen at 10, the next one happens at... You're talking about the analysts now? Yeah, that's right. We haven't worked out how many, what our rotation is in terms of
Right,
questions.
right. So we can, they can, I'm sure, adjust by half an hour or an hour. That's not going to be a problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Okay. So that's your motion, Mr. Cullen. I don't see a real desire to engage in debate on this. Should we vote? Those for Mr. Cullen's motion? Those against? So I think we'll be meeting as a steering committee on Tuesday, and then Wednesday at the same time at 10 a.m. It will be the analysts, and we may jig that a bit, but followed by the committee's directorate on the use of technologies. And I think we've got a plan. Ms. May.
I hate to trespass on the question of whether one can presume from our plans for Tuesday and Wednesday that we're not booking a Thursday meeting, or is that still a possibility?
Well, I haven't seen a motion for a Thursday meeting. Mr. Kudakursi.
I think Ms. May's argument to get home for Canada Day was a good one. I think everyone could benefit from that, certainly our constituents. And I have faith that the subcommittee will find a suitable date soon after Canada Day for us to get back and get to work. Alors, je pense que c'est ça ce qu'on a voté.
So I think that's what we'll vote for.
Monsieur Cullen.
Just to add that piece, I don't know if we discussed it. We discussed it. I don't know if it was passed in the motion, though, about having witnesses in.
So that's a separate motion. Why don't we do that as a separate motion?
So just because of Friday being a holiday, that we look to have all of our witnesses in by end of day Thursday, so that when the committee comes together Tuesday morning, the subcommittee, we'll have something that the analysts can work with us on. Does that seem fair?
Yeah. So this is another point of order. As worded by Mr. Cullen, it's all our witnesses. As paraphrased by the chair, it's our preliminary list of witnesses. I would like to confirm. It's not exhaustive. We can continue to add. Okay, that's critical. As long as that's the case, we'll be happy to.
Donc, Monsieur Cullen, vous proposez.
So, Mr. Cullen, that's your motion that you're moving. All right. Do we proceed with the vote? All those in favor of Mr. Cullen's motion, please raise your hand. Those opposed?
Preliminary list of witnesses. For the 22nd. That's the 22nd, or is it the 23rd? 23rd, yeah. 23rd. No, le juin, c'est le 23 juin.
June 23rd. Thursday, June 23rd. That's right. Okay. Are there any other motions?
For the assistance of the subcommittee, steering committee, if folks could also submit any preference in terms of sitting over the summer, whether it be 2 days a week for the rest of the summer, whether it be a block of time, because that would be helpful for the steering committee to have that information when we're planning out what we're going to do. So I would recommend that also be submitted by Thursday, end of day.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think we need a motion for that. Oui, Monsieur Thériault.
Oui, Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Thériault. Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if I should refer to the steering committee, but
Par souci de transparence, j'imagine.
When it comes to the budget, I imagine it would be interesting to everyone to know what the budget is and what's in the, for example, in the government motion, there are some deadlines. So when are we going to discuss how this is all going to play out? We're talking about this ourselves, but there are 338 members who have to do consultations, town halls in their ridings. How are those things going to be brought together? How serious are those town halls going to be? Who's going to reconcile all this? Is there just going to be one consultation per riding? Is that enough? Who's going to decide that? The steering committee? Or I think we're going to have to figure this out and make other members know, because they're going to have to adjust. Time's flying, and a lot of decisions need to be made. There's lots of questions. I imagine I could save them for the steering committee, but Well, when it comes to the budget, we've been allotted $300,000 rather, sorry. And when it comes to how the consultations will play out, the individual consultations in each riding, well, we'll see. Each member is going to consult their own constituents, but that's all stuff that we should discuss at the steering committee. Okay. Yeah, the mechanics will be discussed there. Mr. Reid.
Yeah, I know we don't want to presuppose or get ahead of the steering committee on in terms of suggesting witnesses, but seeing as everybody else got in the game, there is one person who, any normal committee that's studying a legislative proposal or a change to the system would start with this witness, and that is the relevant minister. So I would suggest that we try to get Minister Monsef at the earliest convenient opportunity. I think the nature of the work that the analysts are submitting to us means that it's reasonable for them to go ahead of her. But I do think that we should be attempting to get Minister Monsef at the earliest reasonable opportunity, with regard always to considerations of availability, as we would do with any witness or any minister in any similar situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cullen.
I agree entirely with Scott, and this would be through Mr. Holland to be able to, this is a traditional role for the parliamentary secretary to be a liaison between the committee and the minister, and starting us off with any comments the Minister Monsef might have about what this committee is engaged in, I think would be very helpful for us.
Mr. De Courcy.
I would tend to agree that we have Mr. Holland here to help steer that process, and we've also to my count, heard from the minister many times in the House of Commons. Now we have work that we need to do, speaking with academics, speaking with international experts, getting a sense of this process before we endeavor down that route, in my mind.
Ms. Sahota.
I think this is a question of witnesses as well, so we should leave this up to the steering committee to schedule, if possible, the minister and not a discussion really here at this time.
Mr. Holland, do you have something to add? That from
just to say that the minister obviously would look forward to speaking before the committee. I know the steering committee is going to look at availability and hearing of witnesses and the scheduling of when's appropriate, and we'll look forward to the committee's guidance on when it's most valuable.
Merci, Mr. Deltel.
I think it's a tremendous support.
Thank you, Mr. Deltel.
The mind of the minister. For sure, we ask plenty of questions to her, days after day after day, but it's only 30 seconds answer. Now we'll have plenty of time and plenty of a question, and also plenty of time for her to explain what is the target with this bill and especially with this committee.
C'est noté, c'est noté. Et,
duly noted. Clearly, there will be more discussion, particularly at steering committee.
if there's nothing else on the, yes, Madam May.
I'd just like to congratulate the chair for his election. I didn't get a chance to take the floor to congratulate the first vice president and second vice president. And I'd like to say I think this committee started out in an excellent fashion in that almost all of I think every single motion was approved unanimously. May it continue to be so.
Thank you. On that, is there a motion to, you don't? Oh, there we go.